Continuing on with the Torah diet. The Torah diet is covered in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. In the previous video, we talked about the New Testament passages that are used to teach that the Torah diet has been done away with, and we saw that that was not true, that we are still supposed to follow the Torah diet just like we're supposed to follow the rest of the Torah. And, and so we have two entire chapters which are basically the same, reiterating that we're supposed to have particular things that we eat and particular things that we do not eat. So let's start off with a little bit of the history of the diet. Originally, in Genesis 1:29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the land, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be food. So in Genesis 1, he gives us a vegetarian diet. We're not allowed to eat animals. Okay? Then what happens is that people started to be violent, and that means that they would start hunting. And you see this going on in the early chapters of Genesis. And after the flood, God gives permission to eat meat. And this is in Genesis 9, verse 2 and 3. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the land, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moves upon the ground, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So here he is giving them the permission to eat animals, okay? And the reason for this is because people have gotten a taste of the meat, and they want to eat the meat, right? Now, when Noah went into the ark, he had not yet been given the right to eat meat. Prior to this, all of the people who were following God's commands were vegetarian. Okay? And when he went into the ark, there were certain animals that were called clean animals, and of the clean animals, he had to bring 7. Of the unclean animals, he had to bring 2. Okay? So, when we're talking about clean animals for Noah, we're not talking about animals that you eat. We're talking about being clean for some other reason, right? Because they weren't eating animals. So why would he understand what was clean animals if he wasn't eating any animals? Genesis 4:4. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of the flock and of the fat thereof, and Yahuwah had respect unto Abel and to his offering. And when Adam and Eve sinned, they tried to clothe themselves with fig leaves. Well, that didn't work very good. So God gave them coats of skin. And this is a clue to the fact that God was showing them how to sacrifice animals. So the animals had to be sacrificed in order to teach about Messiah dying for the sins. And Adam and Eve understood that a human being called the seed of the woman would come and die for our sins. And so they would use the sacrifices in order to teach that point, in order to understand that point. Okay? Now, what animals are you allowed to sacrifice? Only clean animals. So when God was teaching them all this stuff, he had to teach them what was a clean animal, what was not. Okay, so they understood what was clean animals and what was not, for the purpose of sacrificing. After the flood, when they were allowed to eat animals, they understood that they were supposed to eat only clean animals, not unclean animals. When you get to the law of Moses, he specifies this. Here is the list of clean animals that you can eat, and here's the stuff that's not clean that you cannot eat. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of a history of the thing, which is kind of interesting because in the millennium, it says that the lion will lay down with the lamb. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the lion is vegetarian. If the lion was eating lambs, the lambs wouldn't be laying down with them. Okay, you'd have this fear. And this is what he says. He says, when you start eating animals, the fear of man comes on the animals. And that also has to do with the animals. The animals were vegetarian also originally. Okay? And in the millennium, they're going to become vegetarian again, which means that the people will probably become vegetarian again in the millennium. Because it says that a little child will put its hand in the cobra's den, right? Well, what does that mean? That means that the animals do not have a fear of man, right? Why do they bite people? Because they're afraid of them. So if they don't have a fear of them, they're not going to bite you. Which means that people are not eating them and hunting them, right? So we're going to go back to a vegetarian diet. But it's interesting that when you study the sacrifices, you will see that some of the sacrifices, such as the sin offering and the peace offering, you are required to eat part of the meat. And that means that you're a vegetarian, but when you do that particular sacrifice, you have to eat meat. And it was the case, assuming, prior to the flood, that they were eating the meat of the sacrifice. And this, of course, would possibly give people the idea of going out and hunting animals, right? To eat all the time. Some people decided they liked that. But to a vegetarian, eating meat is abhorrent. Okay, it really, really bothers you. And the sacrifice is designed to really bother you. Okay, so in the early days before the flood, the sacrifices were particularly horrible to these vegetarian people. And again, in the millennium, it'll be the same thing. The sacrifices will be done again. We read this in the last chapters of Ezekiel. And they will be especially horrible to us because we will be vegetarian at that time. And so that's kind of interesting about the history of the biblical diet. Okay, I'm going to break right there, and then we will get into the details of which animals you're supposed to eat and which not.